so that I could look like a different presenter than this morning, and I thank the group very much for this red golf shirt. My wife won't let me bring red in the house, but that's okay. I'll wear it today, proudly. My pleasure to be talking this afternoon about long-term player development, give you some insight into where Hockey Canada currently is at in the long-term player development model, and certainly make sure that everybody's aware that it's a much bigger picture in terms of youngsters playing sport in Canada. Albert Einstein said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And for everything we're doing here today, this may capture to some degree what we are about. We oftentimes will sit and we will discuss and engage in dialogue about opportunities, about possible change, but we'll go back to doing the same things over and over again because we're comfortable with that, we're used to that. And we've got to look at the changing dynamics in today's world and understand that youngsters want to see things done a little differently. Few things to change people, for things to change, people have to start acting differently. And change boils down to getting people to start behaving in a new way. So one of the things I like to point out to people is that there's lots of opportunity out there to learn, especially through books, through video, through the internet. One of the things I always talk about is the difference between where you are today and where you'll be 5 years from now. Will be the books you read and the people you meet. And I probably have used this quote for about 10 years, so hopefully I've read a few books, and there are some differences in the way that I operate. I'm going to introduce you to some books at the end of the presentation that I have used as part of the information that comes through this presentation on long-term player development. This particular book by Lou Holtz, coach from Notre Dame, he wrote a book called A Championship Season. Great book, and he talks about, in one little story in there, he talks about a gentleman walking past a site and looking at this marvelous building that is currently being torn down. And he said to the gentleman that was involved in the project, what are you doing? Like, does it take a long time to do this? He says, no. He says, it took years to build this magnificent building, a lot of patience, a lot of toil, people really putting a lot of heart into it. He says, we can tear it down in a week. And part of Holtz's story is to suggest that, as builders, we have to be very thoughtful, very mindful of the process that we go through, and we have to recognize that it doesn't take much to make something disappear. It takes a lot of hard work, a lot of effort to put a great model in place. So Hockey Canada's vision: lead, develop, and promote positive hockey experiences. And we can see that wafting through our entire organization across this country. Every branch you go to, whether you're in member partner or minor hockey associations, the desire is to lead, develop, and promote positive experiences for youngsters in this sport. We've got to get way past the idea that our responsibility is to develop youngsters for the women's national team, to develop youngsters for the National Hockey League, to develop youngsters for our national team programs. We've got to get past that and understand that the base is so broad that our perspective has to be every youngster that comes into the system and what the system can do for them. So Sport Canada's vision is that the health and well-being of a nation and the medals won at major games are simple byproducts of an effective sports system. What we need is a sports system that really meets the needs of all participants: coaches, officials, administrators, and most particularly the athletes and the young players in sport. And so we really find that if we've got an effective sports system, ultimately we've got a healthy society, and in the end, if we're doing things right, the good players that percolate to the top of the system will be a part of those medals. Just a quick glimpse at what I call the elite player pathway for men's and women's programs in Canada. Young players start making decisions at the end of their Pee Wee years on the male side, and then things start happening for them in Bantam, and Bantam draft happens, and they go into midget AAA, they go into junior and major junior, and ultimately off to professional hockey. That's the elite pathway. On the female side, very similarly, During those Bantam and midget years, they're developing and being identified as potential national team pool players, under 18 program, under 22 program, and eventually the women's national team. We also have Senior A women's hockey in Canada, the Canadian Women's Hockey League. So we have great places for young women and young men to play the sport at every level, but in particular through the elite level pathways, we've got all these development stages in place. But I point that out because I think you need to look at the bigger model. When youngsters enter sport, they enter at the base. Physical literacy is the issue. 5 to 7-year-old youngsters playing hockey need to have an athletic base. They don't need to have a great hockey skill base, but they need to have the basics, fundamental movement skills, agility, balance, coordination, and we need to make sure that our programs address that as opposed to programs that address more the tactics and strategies of sport at a young age. And that base in our program involves every youngster that enters the game. Now the blue represents the competitive and recreation stream, but more particularly as players get older and more competitive, you start to see that in the high performance area, the number of athletes is getting smaller. So when we look at 565,000 athletes across the country playing hockey, and this entire graph when I'm done shows those players, you can see that that elite piece is very, very small. In the women's side of the game, in the men's side of the game, for the total number of participants in the game, that number is small. And ultimately what we want in our sports system is for all who are engaged to be active for life, to continue playing this game well beyond years that they might spend in the sport professionally or in the high performance level, at the college level, the university level, at the major junior level, that they're active for life. And that really completes the player pathway. Do we provide opportunities for players to be engaged in this sport long term? Again, if we've got a healthy system, then it really does allow for those who are participating to be in a healthy environment, a healthy active lifestyle. So a solid athletic foundation can lead to, I put these 4 things: an active, healthy lifestyle, opportunities in sport, and they go well beyond just the competition of sport, new opportunities in sport. And I always say, can you think of some examples? I think a good example for me last year during the Olympics was Canada's 2 women bobsled, Team 1 and Team 2. Those young women didn't start out as 5-year-old bobsledders, did they? But they were terrific athletes. And so the athletic base that was in place allowed them to move to another sport, to cross over, and to be a much better competitor in a new sport. So I'll give you another example here.
When I was 5, I started to do sport and I started to love sport. I was a dream to be the Olympic champion and gymnast. Every day, every year, we went to gymnastics. People say, oh wow, I'm so tired, and I'm cold, please can I stay at home? She said, no, you have to go there. I said, no, you must do that, go and do that. I was feeling that I can achieve something great in gymnastics. I think that I really want to start. I never missed the dream, so that's maybe why I'm here now. When I was 15, I finished gymnastics because I was so tall, and when I made some exercise, I got to floor. I was afraid to do something difficult, something dangerous. I tried to understand that I can break my legs or arms. I was afraid for that. But I didn't want to finish sport because I like so much and this is my life. My coach from gymnastics asked me, do you want to try a pole vault? I said, what is a pole vault? Taking the pole. I was surprised because it's so long and I can't imagine how it was to do something before. The gymnastics helped me a lot because I have power, I have some speed. Yeah, I don't know how technically right to do some exercise, but I was ready. My first jump was a 270 and I thought maybe using that I jumped and ha ha ha. I like this, but I was good for that. They will say, okay, in future you will jump 5 meters. Just I say, are you crazy? I can jump 3 meters, you don't tell me about 5, it's impossible. So nobody believes it's possible for you. When I start to believe in myself, and I start to think that it's right, that I'm important, year by year I improve myself and improve the results, and now I'm the first swimmer over 5 meters. Next, I will go over height, which I achieve already, and which I want to achieve in the future.
So these are little vignettes you can find on YouTube. Write it down if you want. It's Impossible is Nothing. There's several of them. This one, Yelena Yezbanayev, is a Russian pole vaulter, a world champion, gold medalist at 2 Olympics, and just a wonderful story about developing an athletic base and then transitioning into a new sport. And she illustrated through her drawings, you could see that she was showing on the uneven bars that when she was rotating on the top bar, she was now too tall to be on the uneven bars because her feet were banging into the lower bar. But she did say in the video, and I know her accent is very thick, but she said, gymnastics helped me a lot because I have power and some speed. I don't know how technically right to do some skills, but I am ready. And I think that's, you know, oftentimes when we talk about youngsters playing in other sports and being involved in other athletic pursuits, the reason is we're trying to develop that athletic base, that athletic confidence that really permeates into all sports that youngsters participate in. And so with Yelena, she I should point out here, has 19 world records. She has 1 world record and then she beat it 18 times. But she's the first woman to clear 5 meters, and she did it 3 times in major competitions before 2010. 5 meters, that's a long way up. Anyways, and she thought that's impossible when her coach told her that, but her coach said, your athletic ability, as I train you in this sport, will carry you to new heights. And I think that's a great story. So the shortcomings in our system right now, and this is our sports system, this is not a criticism of hockey, this is more a challenge to all youth sports in Canada. We overcompete and we undertrain. And when I talk about training, I talk about the opportunities for youngsters to learn and develop skills in the sport. I'm not talking about off-ice training to the max with youngsters. I'm just talking about the ability to train and learn new skills. Adult programming imposed on children. Still, you know, being pressured at very young ages to play full ice games, to play soccer on a large field, to play basketball with 12-foot hoops. When we start to see game environments modified, we start to see kids have more success. If we talk about half-ice hockey, or if we talk about sideboard hockey, pond hockey, we see more puck touches, we see more activity around the puck. We don't see as big a space between the puck carrier and the other 9 players chasing that player around the ice. So, you know, that's an example of making sure that with youngsters, we're not imposing adult level regulations on youngsters. Preparation geared to short-term outcomes. Short-term outcomes, recently in a soccer article, and it was a journalist that was very critical of soccer, what was happening at the 6, 7, and 8-year-old level. Everything seemed to be in pursuit of a $5 trophy, as opposed to making sure that youngsters were developing the skills and more successful in the sport. It was who wins at the end of the day, who gets the trophy. Knowledgeable coaches are at the elite level. I would like to say that for the most part in our system, we spend a lot of time in hockey right at the minor hockey level, the grassroots level, working to develop our coaches, working to support our coaches, and providing them with the resources to deliver good training or good teaching programs for youngsters in the arena. What we have to do in leadership roles is ensure that people know that the resources are there to support them. I'll give you a classic example. I've done summit activities where people say, you know, one of the things we could do to help develop better coaches, we could create a curriculum that tells coaches what to teach kids at each age. And we could get that out to all the coaches. So Hockey Canada, go to it. Get us that curriculum. Does that sound familiar to anybody in this room? Help me out here. Chris? It sounds familiar. You don't want to tell me what it is? Initiation program and skills manuals. Hey, other countries love us for it. They buy it. So we need to make sure that when we get it into our associations, we put it in the hands of coaches, and then we make sure that the coaches know how to use it and that it's right to use it. I remember the first time I was coaching my son's Adam C team. My coaching experiences are varied. So I was coaching university hockey on Fridays and Saturday nights in Vancouver, practicing Monday to Thursday, but I was also coaching an Adam C team. So I was keeping everything in perspective. A recreational team that was a little better than the team I was coaching at UBC. Sorry, Barry. Of course, my years at, well, we don't even have to talk about my years at UBC on the bench, but because I knew that position really well. But when I was working with those kids, I would go out on the ice and we would share practice with another team. I'd post up the practice plan. I remember the coach skating by me one day from the other team, puts on the brakes. What are you doing? I said, oh, I'm just posting up the practice plan. So he comes over and he looks and he goes, well, skills manuals? Oh, I thought you knew more than that. And the guy beside me says, no, he's on the committee that helped write those materials, so that is kind of his stuff. And I looked at the other coach and I said, what are you doing? And he said, we're scrimmaging. Where are your game jerseys? And so a lot of times I find that when coaches say to me, kids would rather play than practice, they would rather play and have fun than go through a boring practice. So the challenge is, how do you create those practices? Well, I know coaches are stressed for time, so we put it together in a format that would allow them to peel it out of the book, take it to the rink, put it up on the glass. Bob Stevenson, you were a part of our writers group a couple of years ago when we were even looking at, hey, if there are issues with half-ice practices, let's do a half-ice manual. If there are issues with, you give a coach a 90-minute practice plan, you know what the first thing they do? They hand it back to you and say, can't use it, they get a 75-minute practice. Or if you give them 75-minute plan, they go, nah, not good enough. I got 90 minutes of ice. Okay, add a minute to each of the 8 items, and you've got 90. Competition interferes with athlete development. There's no question that when you get older in this sport, you spend more time practicing. And you get better and better. And we find that the drills that players do at older ages, players in our national team programs, players at the junior level, they're practicing. Repetition, over and over again. They're really getting much better at doing the skills that we first introduced to them when they were younger, but we really didn't give them time to master. Okay, you got it? That's the breakout. Ready to roll? Okay, we're going to be the best 5-year-old team out there. Let's go. Program integration and alignment. Well, one of the things you need to do is you need to look at what's available through long-term player development, and then you need to go into the resources and make sure that the resources are aligned with what's being suggested. So we've done that. If you go into the skills manuals, you can certainly see all the philosophy and the components of long-term player development at the beginning of the manual, but you know that the manuals are built on sound pedagogy. That's what youngsters need at that age. And so for the average coach to start designing practices for an Adam team, not really knowing exactly what youngsters need, shouldn't they go to the recipe book and at least rely on that as the foundation to build their plans? And then as they gain some experience, start to stretch the borders of the plan and include some things that they would like to add. Early specialization is demanded, and we are not an early specialization sport, and I'll show you that in a minute. Male programs imposed on females. I think we're getting much, much better in our game, but there was a time when girls had to pick up very heavy hockey sticks. Girls were wearing equipment that was ill-fitted. And now we see ourselves, with equipment that's more focused on the needs of the female athletes. So we need to make sure that when we look at LTPD, we're talking about developmental needs of both female and male athletes. So what is the importance of the long-term player development plan? Well, it ensures physical literacy. As I mentioned earlier, physical literacy is critical. And that's where we make sure that youngsters have the tools and the skills to compete in the game as they get older. We need to look at ways to optimize the competition structure, integrate sports at all levels, and optimize training, competition, and recovery. So what do I mean by optimize competition structure? Well, one of the things we do in our system, and we're talking all the time about different ways of delivering our programs, we have places in this country where playoffs start in January. So first round, yes, we made it into the playoffs. 2 games later, ooh, we're out. Okay, now what? Meanwhile, Team A, first place, into the playoffs. Oh, got a bye in the first round. Come into the second round, blow out that team. Go to the third round, blow out that team. Middle of March, yep, still going. This is pretty good. What are you doing? I'm watching TV. I've been out for 2 months. And our system forces kids who want to play the game. You know why they want to play the game? Because they're watching it on TV till June. Every night they go home and cuddle in with mom and dad and watch the NHL playoffs and go, man, I wish I could play hockey. Yeah, no, you were done in January. This is Canada. We don't see the sun until April. So we get kids living in the middle of winter, not playing hockey. So that's, that's one of the things we have to do is we have to look at an optimized competition structure. Kids playing more, longer. But a lot of times we allow the league structure in the playoff system to define the scheduled times. Oh, we need to see you guys at the X tournament at the end of April. And so that means working backwards. Oh, now we got 30 teams in the league. Okay, let's start playoffs on December 15th so that we can have a winner by April. And that's just too early. If you're going to start your playoffs in January, you're going to run out of time for youngsters to play the sport. We want to promote lifelong physical activity. We don't want kids leaving the sport because the sport doesn't accommodate their desire to play the game for as long a period of time as they like. In fairness, there is what we call the third-party system, and the third-party system does a great job of walking right in and filling the gap. We create the gap. We decide that at the end of January, you lost out in the playoffs, you're done. So, across the street to the private hockey programs, this is where I'm going to play because at least now I'll get to play for the same amount of time as my friends who are on a team that are still in the playoff pursuit. We want to promote lifelong physical activity. We want them to be involved in hockey as a sport of choice. So I talked about late developing sports. Men's Olympic hockey team in 2010, I did a quick calculation. It's pretty easy. Go on our website. Goaltenders, average age 32. Defense, average age 29. Forwards, average age 27. So did the same thing with our women's program. Goaltenders, average age 28. Defense, 28. Forwards, 27. I don't know how old you are, Rebecca. I didn't look it up. But I can tell you we had a 19-year-old on the ice, so she helped bring the average down. You throw a couple of young players in there who are phenomenal, and they do bring the average down a bit. But that tells you that it's a late developing sport. So why are we in such a hurry to develop 8 and 9-year-olds that will be nowhere near this picture 10, 20 years down the road? Because it's too early. We might want to say burnout. I'm going to take you into a little bit of science here, but before I do, I'll let this guy help me.
Players' thoughts go through a player's mind during the final round and impact whether they're hitting on all cylinders. Let's think of the practice the archives staff. It's a tip on what goes through the mind of a pro and how to look like you're in the zone, even when you might not be. I've been asked many times, JC, what are your swing thoughts as you're swinging? What are the secrets? What are the secrets of golf that pros know? Well, I heard this one time, and I remembered it. It's really, if you write this down, it really helps. What I try to do, I try to flat load my feet so I can snap load my power package. That way I can amplify both lag and drag pressure to impact fix. As long as my number 2 power accumulator doesn't break down, I can reach maximum centrifugal force with minimum pivotal resistance. You see, the pivot is utilization of multiple centers to produce a circular motion for generating centrifugal force on an adjusted plane, plus make some bounce necessary for its 2-line delivery path. See, golf is geometrically oriented linear force. It involves a physical muscular thrust and geometry of the circle. You can divide the golf swing into 24 basic components, each have between 12 and 15 variations. Now, when you think of all this, and you get it all set, hopefully you'll hit shots like this.
I use this clip for a couple of reasons. One, we're right in the middle of the presentation. We need some entertainment. 2, I want to see how many people. I saw 6 people pick up a pen when he said, write this down. Ooh, what's he going to say? But more than anything, we're going to go into just a little bit of research here. So I wanted to prep you for, if you didn't understand that, you may not understand the next 3 slides. So skill development goes like this. Just over time, players acquire skills. Eventually they get to a place where it flattens out. But early on, you can see that the rise is high. So the early learner in sport, they acquire their skills quicker than the late developer. But look where they get to. What a surprise. They can get to the same place. And you can see that the gaps get smaller and smaller between their abilities. If we've got a system that allows that late developer to continue to flourish, continue to develop, continue to be excited about playing the sport, this is what will happen. Unless we just park them aside and say, you know what, you're 8, you don't have it. We got to move you on. What do you think? Baseball? Lacrosse? You don't even have to say that. They're probably already saying it to their parents. Yeah, coach says I don't have it. Son, you're 5. It's okay. No, coach said it, I should try another sport. He said tiddlywinks. I don't know what that is, Dad. But that's what's happening, is that there are times when people say, I had a guy come to me and say, hey, your son, he's just not pursuing that puck. Well, they were playing in an old converted curling rink. And, you know, they had the wire across the top that, you know, they use a pebbling machine, and the wire keeps that warm hose off the ice. So I got a 5-year-old skating around out there trying to touch the rope. Meanwhile, the game's going on, and his mom's looking at me like, what is he doing? I said, well, he's getting pretty close. And then she said, but can that be good? And I said, man, look at his balance. True skating instructor, jumping on a pair of skates. And I'm going, he lands. He doesn't fall down. Coach comes over to me and says, he doesn't get it. Sorry, coach, what doesn't he get? Well, you know, there's a puck to be chased around the ice. I said, yeah, he'll get there. Maybe next year. Maybe when he's 8 or 9. You know what? He's 23, loves hockey, great kid. That never affected him at all. If I tell him that story now, he might be a little embarrassed. He'd, oh, come on, Dad, I scored a lot of goals that year. Yeah, 1. He'd say, yeah, you got 3 at UBC in 5 years. So we don't even go there. We don't even have those conversations. But the reality is, if you give those players a chance to develop, they will get there. So one of the books I read talked about this in education. I'll show you these books in a minute, but here's the same thing that happens. The yellow line is the advanced learner. So here's what happens. In our school system, we go to school, I would say with the Pro D days and the long weekends and everything else, we're about 9.5 months a year for school. During that time, youngsters learn at the same rate. So what I've done here is I've showed you what happens. These 2 youngsters start school at the same time, but when summer between grade 1 and 2 happens, one youngster goes home and watches TV, maybe doesn't have a lot of enhanced programming. The other youngster, right off to academic camp, science camp, computer camp, hockey school, just a million things going on, 8 months, fully programmed, fully packed. Guess what? Continuing to develop, while the youngster at home, hey, just plateaus, a couple of months off, kind of nice. And so what happens is that gap grows over time. So if we don't have a system in education that takes care of enhancement, the same thing will happen that happens in sport. That youngsters that are pushed aside and not given those same developmental opportunities will lag behind. That's just reality. So what happens is we look at something called windows of optimal training. Developmental age across the top, 5 through to 20 plus. Down at the bottom, we talk about physical, mental, cognitive, emotional development. Peak height velocity is that sort of window of time where you really have great opportunities for youngsters to develop skills. So I often talk about the Skills Academy program or teaching hockey skills in the school system to be best targeted at the grade 4 to 7 level, because grade 4 to 7 level is in that peak height velocity range. Now, why do I have 2 groups there? Early developers. Why might it be pink? Because most often girls are developing quickly or more quickly than boys, and the early adopters are usually girls. Guys can develop a little earlier as well, but typically the yellow, the later developers are guys. But look at that range of 11 to 14, where that's the optimal window of skill development. So it's critical that we look at those are times Hey, 17, 18, 19 years old playing junior hockey, 21 to 25. Hey, 21 to 25, when I was playing university, we practiced 4 times a week. That was great. I could have used 4 times a week when I was 8 if I wanted ice time when I was 21. I was happy to get the ice time during practice. But these are the things we work on: suppleness, skill development, stamina, more skill development, and strength. And strength, you can see, is happening at a much later time. Suppleness, that about agility, balance, coordination, 7, 8, 9, 10, those athletic skills. Then we get into stamina in the 12 to 14-year-old range, and we get into strength training, 14 to 17-year-old range. Those are just averages. It can happen a little earlier, it can happen a little later. So the gifted athlete, in my mind, gifted athletes don't skip steps. They just move through some developmental steps much quicker than others. But a video, again, if you YouTube, you can watch a video of Sidney Crosby when he was younger and interviewed by CBC. I think he was 13 or 14 at the time. What he has to say as a youngster is phenomenal. I'm not going to show the clip, but he's a youngster that went through all those developmental steps like everybody else, just quicker. Just got it and knew what he had to do and was focused. And lots of youngsters are like that in sport. Remember Lou Holtz. So the books you read, the people you talk to. Outliers, a lot of people have heard of Outliers, got lots of press. 2 other really good books, The Talent Code and Talent is Overrated. You know, it talks about scenarios. The Talent Code, for example, from Daniel Coyle, he traveled around the world and studied all of these environments that really worked on creating elite athletes, masters in activity. He studied chess masters, he studied artists, he studied musicians. It was interesting because that's where you first get introduced to the 10,000 hour rule. Actually, if you go back to the 1999 summit, Janet Starks did her presentation on where will the next Gretzky come from. She talked about the 10,000 hour rule. Now, the 10,000 hour rule is the amount of practice over a 10-year period that is involved in becoming a master at something. So the really good example was in either the Talent Code or in Outliers. It's hard to keep the 3 books separate, but they studied a group of 600 musicians, cellists, and they broke them into 3 groups. And they had the music teachers rate the musicians into one of 3 groups. The very top group, the middle group, and the bottom group in terms of skill level. So about 200 cellists in each of these 3 groups. So once the teachers finished rating them based on their musical abilities, they then went in and surveyed them and asked them how much they practiced. Top group, 8 to 10,000 hours, 2 a person. So all they did was apply the formula to the ratings that the teachers gave them. Bottom group, 2,000 hours or less. Good musicians, but likely to end up being music teachers or go on to be band teachers or performers in their local clubs. Top end group, potentially those are the musicians that would go on to philharmonic performances and things like that. So, those are the kinds of illustrations that give us a sense of why practice is so important. Predictors of success, 10,000 hours, deliberate and specific practice, the internal desire to excel, repetition, repetition, repetition. We do not get repetition in games. And I heard the expression last night, if a practice is not going well, we're learning how to do something poorly. Perfect practice, I think, Donnie, you told me this a long time ago. Perfect practice or perfect skill execution is a result of perfect practice. Hockey Canada has a document called the Sport for Life one-pager, Hockey for Life, Hockey for Excellence, and you can see, oops, I'll go back one. It's an 8-stage model, 5 environmental settings, Active for Life Foundation, and program and resource alignment. So what we have here, these down the side in blue are what are called the 5 environmental settings. Active for Life is the foundation all the way around the outside of this. This is where youngsters first enter sport. And I know it's hard to read, but if you get a chance to see this one-pager, and you'll know that, here, for example, this is our Excel stage. So this is a photo of Jana Hefford. At the Excel stage, we're all about excelling on the international stage. And that's sort of the pinnacle of the men's and women's programs in Hockey Canada. But what it takes to, you know, rise through that pyramid in terms of that pathway I showed you early on for elite athletes, if we continue to meet the needs of all players who may never get to this level, we will not compromise the experience of any athlete in the sport, and we will surely provide the environment that the elite level players need to excel. So this is what it looks like. Just I put in here down at the bottom, initiation, novice, atom, peewee, bantam, midget. You can see that we have fundamentals 1 and 2, learn to play, learn to train, train to train, train to compete. Nowhere in there are we, you know, training to win. Training to win is here, sort of post. That's where we start looking at our POE programs, 18 and on, and then excel. And really, I mean, we're identifying at the women's level under 18, at the men's level under 20, even under 17 with our POE program. We're identifying opportunities to expose them to international competition. And yes, we'd love to win, but we need to make sure our players get those international experiences at that level. So this young guy, do you think he knows how to play soccer? Did you see the coach? No, this is the way you do it. This is the way you do it. Practice. A youngster has got that internal desire to learn and excel at sport. So, you know, I use that last little clip just to illustrate that there are lots of youngsters who are very good in sport and will persist on the development of their skills. And they need a system that supports them through that, not gets in the way. A system that doesn't allow them the time to practice, doesn't allow them the time to develop the skills, but forces them into game situations very early and often for a long time, does not give them the environment that they need to develop skills like that youngster. Final thought, a positive experience in sport is the key to retaining athletes long after they leave the competitive stream. We need to ensure that what youngsters get in sport, they absolutely fall in love with the sport and they want to be a part of the sport long term. Thank you.